Okay, everybody, welcome to today's author chat. We're going to be speaking with Jethro Jones. Jethro is a longtime school leader and consultant who helps schools and districts in the U.S. to find simple solutions to complex problems. Jethro was named the Digital Principal of the Year in 2017 by the National Association of Secondary School Principals. He's been hosting the Transformative Principal podcast since 2013, and there's now more than 400 episodes available of Transformative Principal, so make sure to hop on over and subscribe there after you listen to us here. And pertinent to today's conversation, Jethro is author of the new book, SchoolX, How Principals Can Design a Transformative School Experience for Students, Teachers, Parents, and Themselves. Jethro, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to chat with you and honored to be featured with so many other awesome principals on your author chat. So thank you. Did I say principals? I meant authors.
Authors, principals, teachers. We have a little bit of everything, but we have educator, authors. We want to highlight you all here. And, let's kind of get into it and start here. So in your book, SchoolX, you really write about showing principals how to become designers, not just managers or leaders. And this is an idea that I've certainly heard you talk about over the years on Transformative Principal. And so, for those who are new to the concept, really want to think about how does the approach of being a designer as a school leader differ from what principals are usually taught. Obviously there's a lot of lessons to be learned about leadership and what it means to be an effective manager, but this designer concept kind of diverges, or at least brings some new elements into the mix, and so kind of set the stage for what principals might be familiar with and how this is kind of taking them in a new direction.
Yeah, there's tons of research on a managerial approach to schools. There's tons of research on a leadership approach to school, and there's not a ton on designing a school and how it's a different kind of approach. And being a good manager is important for being a school leader, and so is being a good leader. And much of the literature has moved us towards being a good leader. But I think we need to take it a step further and say it's not just about having your own vision for the school, it's about setting up the school so that it meets the needs of those who are currently there. And so you're going to have a different group of people come into your school each year, and it's vital that you design the school to meet their needs, not the needs that your previous groups had or the needs of what the school has been doing for the last 30, 40, 50 years, but the needs of those who are there. Because if we really focus on the needs of those that are there right now, we're going to meet them and support those people in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you first get introduced to design thinking?
I'm kind of a nerd, so I researched a lot of different things, and I learned about design thinking through the company IDEO, and I saw a video about them, and then I got connected with Susie Wise, who is at the Stanford D School, and she introduced me to it more fully, and then I've read a bunch of books about it as well. But what I really appreciate about it is that when you use design thinking, you're able to change and adapt what you're doing on the fly. And it's this process that is pretty much never done. Like, you can never say that I've arrived and this is now perfect, because you're going to have new people coming in and experiencing things differently. So it's a continuous improvement process that is actually manageable. Most school improvement processes make us, set these goals in 5 different areas. And design thinking really allows you to focus on one area and improve that thing, and then move on to the next thing or continue to improve that one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that kind of leads into a relevant question around a big part of the design thinking process, and certainly being a designer of a school, is breaking out of the same old quote unquote, and kind of how do we do things in a way that they should be done based on current circumstances, based on the people in the unique individuals in our school building, and not just do it the way it's always been done, which I think oftentimes when we have that conversation about not just doing it the way it's always been done, doing things new, doing things differently. At least the understanding or the connotation around that is that the way it's always been done is ineffective or does not work. And so stop doing the ineffective thing, do something new. But the reality, and as you've spoken to, is that that's not necessarily the case, but what used to work or what works now isn't necessarily going to work in the future. Or what worked with our students last year, what worked in a different learning context, may not necessarily work the same way now. So it needs to be iterative. It needs to be continuous improvement. So when you think about that dynamic, how do we, I guess, break out of that mindset of doing same thing, the same thing over and over? Perhaps especially when you have been doing things that are effective or have been successful, but still have a mindset of, yes, but we need to, still continue improving here.
Yeah, the idea of that's the way we've always done it has become like this bad word in education now, and for good reason, because a lot of things that we've done have not been good. But then the push has been, well, you need to change what you're doing, and the question is how. And this book really approaches that question of how do we make the changes we need to in our school, and using the design thinking process is a very simple way to do it. But you really have to look at what the people's experience is in their different situations. And so it's not enough to just say, stop doing the thing you've always been doing because it's not working. You have to have a framework for how to improve. And that's where I saw a gap in what was out there, and wanted to be able to provide something that says, this is how you do it. And it works for any group that you're going to be working with. And so being able to move from where you were to where you want to go is possible for anybody. And it just takes some effort to do it. And it takes an understanding of what that change process looks like. And the best part is that you don't have to roll out a new initiative to do something better. And a lot of people feel like that's what they're doing. And so, in one of my schools, we had 33 initiatives in 3 years that we adopted. But we didn't have those initiatives because, it was, here's this thing and this thing and this thing. And we were just loading it on people. Each person took that approach and said, how can I do things better? And then we gave them the autonomy to go and make those things happen. So instead of us spending, a whole school year focused on just this one thing and making that one thing better, each person used their own insight, their own abilities to change what they were doing so that it was better for those that they were serving. And so that turned into, these 33 different initiatives over 3 years, which was, it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like we were doing this big monumental change, but everybody was working in their own little sphere, and that's what it added up to.
Yeah, I mean, almost in a sense, maybe it's changing the context and definition of how we're using the word initiative, right?
Exactly.
Like switching it around from initiative is this big thing, this noun, this plan that is handed down from on high to giving people the autonomy to take initiative in their own environments at a smaller scale, and know that if I see an opportunity, I know that I can address it, and we can kind of keep going from there.
Yeah, and I saw someone on Twitter just the other day mention that school improvement effort should be bottom up, and that's exactly what this book provides. Is SchoolX is designing your school to meet the needs of those people that are actually there. And so anybody can say, this isn't working and this needs to be fixed, and they can bring their own solution to that problem. So it doesn't have to be that an initiative is, like you said, from the top and one person says, this is what we're doing, everybody has to get on board. No, if you have a clear vision and you know what you're trying to do with your school, then everybody can participate in that, and everybody can do their own little part to make the school better and reach that vision that you have for the school.
Right. And another big thing that is related to this is, of course, there's the capital I initiative, which is leader sees an opportunity, they see something they want to achieve, and they make a plan and they get people on board and they go out and it can be done successfully. The flip side of that is sometimes change is thrust upon us and there's a necessity for change, and it's environmental and circumstantial. So a lot of this, I know obviously the ideas in the book you worked on over the course of years, but certainly the lessons around designing the school experience around your current people, your current situation, is timely in a way that you could not have necessarily anticipated, right? As the pandemic and distance learning and everything has really necessitated change and necessitated the designing of a new school experience for many schools who didn't necessarily have a lot of experience with that. I'm wondering, we know what the big picture challenge is around the pandemic, and that's forced school closures or building closures and things like that. But in the conversations you've been having over the past several months, whether as part of your mastermind or in consulting work or otherwise, what are some of the more granular challenges within that have really popped up that maybe either were not a problem before or leaders didn't recognize as problems before, but they were magnified now, that have presented opportunities to think about in this fashion with design thinking and change management, within the context that we're all living in now?
Boy, there have been so many, Ross. I mean, we could do a whole podcast series just on this topic, right? Of how the problems that the pandemic has brought up. And so I'll address just a couple. The first one is equity. And with that, people talk about equity and equality and they interchange those two. And I want to be real clear here that equality is everybody gets the same thing and equity is everybody gets what they need. And what we have to recognize is that different people need different things. In my home, when the closures hit, I was a school principal and I know how to do education. My wife is a college educated woman. And so we have skills, we have experience, we were good higher in the SES because I was a school principal. And so we didn't need the same things that everybody else needed. Our neighbor across the street, who was in my daughter's class, had two parents who were both essential workers. So they had to go to work. They weren't able to stay home. I was working from home, and so I could be there to support my kids. My wife is a stay-at-home mom, so she was able to support the kids. And I told the school, look, don't worry about us. You don't need to reach out to us. You don't need to check in on us. We're good. Our friend across the street, she's the one who needs more support because she doesn't have her parents home during the day. So she's got older siblings who are watching her. And it's okay for us to take a step back on those that are in a good spot and accelerate support for those who need that support. And this is using the strategies in SchoolX, you can learn how to do that so that you can have that conversation with families and do it appropriately and support them so that you're not assuming that they need something when they don't, but that you're providing the right level of support and having a conversation in a way that is meaningful to them. And so that first piece is equity. So instead of giving the same thing to everybody and making sure everybody has the same thing, find out what they really need and give them that. And if somebody doesn't need everything you're offering, then you can have permission to not give that to them. Like, everybody doesn't need a laptop provided by the school, and some kids already have devices. So let them use that if that's what they choose, because that may be more comfortable. And, so as a principal, I wanted to use my own device because I was familiar with it and comfortable with it. And I would have much rather use that than check out my work computer and bring that home when it wasn't as good and set up as nicely as what I had, because I'm a nerd. And some kids, they may prefer using their own device rather than a school issued device. And that needs to be okay. And then the second piece that I want to talk about comes down to instruction and recognizing that kids don't need busy work now more than ever, we have a great opportunity to address how we're providing instruction to our students and what that looks like. I'm a huge proponent of personalized learning and student-driven learning. And student-driven learning is my own flavor of personalized learning, where kids are the ones who are driving what they want to learn. And again, using my own family as an example, because that's what I know best. My 12-year-old daughter really, she didn't have Spanish offered as an elective at her school, but she wanted to learn it. And so when the pandemic hit, she downloaded Duolingo and started learning Spanish. Now, when I was in middle school and high school and I took Spanish, I was not very good at practicing every day. But my daughter has not missed a day since the pandemic started, because she's been driven herself to want to learn that. Not because I told her that's what she needs to learn, but because she thinks it'd be great if she spoke another language. So she's been spending her time doing that. And that's wonderful, because the school can't provide Spanish instruction to her through the pandemic, but she can go and get some of that on her own. And as she gets better, we'll look at other options. But right now, Duolingo is an appropriate and worthwhile opportunity for her to learn. And so finding what kids are interested in, what gives them purpose, and we often use the word passion when we're describing what kids should be focusing on. And passion is a bit of a misnomer, because it assumes that it just comes naturally and that you just get all fired up doing it. And not everything that we do makes you fired up. And I've been guilty of using passion-based learning before, but I want to switch that to purpose, because when you have a purpose, then you can do a lot to make that happen. And so for my daughter, if she wants to learn Spanish, she's going to do the effort that she needs to learn Spanish. And there are some things that she doesn't really want to do, but she thinks are important. And so she's going to put in the time and effort. So really looking at our instruction and figuring out what that looks like, how to give kids more autonomy and support through that so that they can make their own decisions. Also, that lightens the load on the teacher. If you don't have to provide all this instruction and you can be a coach or a mentor to kids and what they're already interested in learning about, that's going to be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I mean, and if I'm not mistaken, one of your previous roles was as a distance learning specialist, and you've certainly, done distance learning over the years with your schools that you've been the head of. And even with that experience, and despite that, is there anything that's been surprising to you from what you've been hearing from schools who are maybe doing this for the first time or just navigating it? And okay, I've been doing this for a while, we've been thinking about this, and yet there's still something about the current climate that is a little different or surprising from what we expected.
It's not necessarily surprising, but it just continues to amaze me how dedicated and hardworking teachers are at going the extra mile to make things happen for their kids, because it's tough and this is hard work. And when I was the distance learning supervisor for my district, they were teaching sign language in one high school campus and broadcasting simultaneously to 3 different campuses. And so 4 total high schools were involved in this. So they all had class at the same time, and it took a ton of scheduling to make it work. And we were using very expensive Polycom equipment that was a big deal. And teachers are trying to do this with just Zoom. I mean, it's crazy. Microsoft Teams or whatever they're using. And it's a big ask, to be sure. And those teachers who taught those sign language classes, they had aides in the different classes at different schools so that they could provide support to the kids in the classroom. And it was a big endeavor to make that happen, but something the district thought was important. And now, this is just thrust on teachers, and many of them have to do this, and it's really, really challenging. So I think the biggest thing that's been surprising is that we have really gotten away from conversations about instruction. And in the masterminds that I run with principals each week, when we have been able to talk about instruction, their response has been, "Oh, this is so nice to talk about instruction again," because we've only been talking about, COVID practices and safety and all that kind of stuff. And we haven't had these actual conversations about instruction. And to be honest, that's not too surprising either, because we get overwhelmed with the safety stuff. But that's something we need to get back to. And so I definitely want to help principals get to that point where they're talking about instruction again, because, kids can still learn even when they're not in school, but they can learn much better when they have support from their school to do so.
Yeah. Are there any particular changes that have been adopted in a more widespread fashion, maybe due to necessity over the past several months here, that you are anticipating are here to stay, or that you at least hope are here to stay?
I think one of the things that I've heard a lot about, and especially this summer, I did some reopening schools workshops with principals who were making a plan for reopening their schools. And every single person in there was focused more on the social emotional health of their students and paying attention to that than I've ever seen before. And so that's an area where we are paying attention to that. We need to continue paying attention to that. And not that, it's impossible for kids to be engaged in learning if they're not perfectly emotionally healthy, but it makes a difference. And that doesn't mean that it's an excuse that if a kid's not emotionally healthy one day, he can't possibly learn. That's not the case. But being aware of that, paying attention to it, providing support for that is so vital to their success, and helping them manage that themselves, not to mention the teacher's success as well. They need to be paying attention to their emotional well-being and make sure that they're doing things to take care of themselves and support their own mental health as well.
Do you think that time will tell as things transition back to the more typical in-person learning context, but especially as it relates to social emotional needs and well-being, perhaps some of the challenges of feeling the difficulties of checking in on those things and supporting them remotely will influence leaders and teachers to not take it for granted as much when you're back in the building. I've thought about this over the years, working for remote companies, not for schools, but in a remote environment where you have colleagues and employees and people in different locations, and what's the difference between that setup and being in an office. And I can't see exactly what you're doing, and I have to make certain inferences, or I have to be more proactive about checking in on certain things in that communication piece, because you don't have that shorthand to, okay, I looked over at your desk and I saw you there and I saw what you were doing, kind of thing. But I think in a sense, until you're in that different environment, there are certain things that are just part of the normal experience that you take for granted, or that just seems routine. And then you're more mindful of it maybe when you've gone through a different experience. So I'm wondering, and I guess in a sense it's a hopeful thing, that I think some leaders, because of the widespread collective trauma of the current situation, and understanding that certain students have experienced more or less direct forms of it, but it's something that everybody's sort of navigating through together, have been really attuned to SEL is first, right? Like addressing social emotional needs comes first, and that's the foundation. And then if we can get to academics after that, great. That, perhaps that's not exactly the mindset that they had before, but maybe it'll translate, or or at least kind of change the balance of the weight that those are given.
Yeah, one of the things that people all over have been saying, especially during this pandemic, is Maslow's before Bloom's, and there's some wisdom in that, but I think that there's more nuance to it than just take care of social emotional first and then you can talk about learning. Because we know from experience that kids sometimes get more Maslow by not talking about Maslow, right? So they get more emotional support by not talking about their emotional challenges, but just focusing on and getting to work. And so we don't want to just say like, oh yeah, let's just do all social emotional all the time, because sometimes people need the distraction from their emotional problems to focus on something else. And again, this goes back to that whole idea of knowing the people that you're working with and seeing what it is that they need individually. And it's not something that we can say every kid needs Maslow's before Bloom's. That's too restrictive, because for some people they may need it the other way around. And so we just need to pay attention to individuals. And I'm really pushing this idea of focusing on the individual, because that's what everybody remembers. That's what everybody cares about. That's what gets everybody through these tough times, is knowing that someone cares about you. Rita Pearson says that every child needs a champion, and that is absolutely the truth. And a champion is more than just someone who cares about you. It's someone who not only cares about you, but helps lift you up and champions you and helps make you the best version of yourself. So that's what we need to be focusing on. Not necessarily that we're focusing on Bloom's first or Maslow's hierarchy of needs first, or whatever the case may be. What we need to do is focus on that individual student as a human being and support them first and foremost. And by getting to know them, we will then learn what it is that they need, because we'll be seeking that information.
Yep, absolutely. And right along with that, the focus on the individual is also, I think, how you're defining the individuals that are part of this dynamic. And in the book, and in even in many of the things you've been saying here during the interview, the parent and community experience is part of that, right there with leaders, teachers, and students. That audience is an equal part of the learning experience. The empathy piece for everyone in the school community has, again, it's another thing that's taken on even more urgency and gotten more focus recently. But you were, of course, ahead of it with developing this part as your approach. But what are some of the actions, if we're thinking specifically about parents or others in the community that are not always going to even be a section or a chapter of a book like this? What are some of the actions that leaders really have to be taking to ensure that their experience is a good experience?
Well, I think the first thing is putting yourself in their shoes and experiencing what the school is like for them. I got a whole different idea of what school was like when my daughter started attending my school. And, I'd done shadow student and I read teachers' newsletters before they went out. But when I became the parent of a student in my school, it really changed how I saw how things were working, because some things just weren't. And other things I was like, oh yeah, we totally nailed that. But other things I was like, man, our parents have no idea what's going on. And especially during this pandemic, I got to share a great story about this. During the reopening workshops, I had a homework assignment for the teachers or the principals to do, which was to call 10 families and talk to them about their experience that were not, the PTA president and the mom who's always in your office, but 10 people that they didn't really know, and just cold call them and say, what has your experience been like? And one principal reported that she called someone, and it was a dad, and he said, boy, I'm so glad that you called me. I have no idea what's going on with school. And she said, well, we've sent all this stuff. You haven't been getting it. And he said, well, I'm illiterate, so I can't read. And so I don't know what has been sent, because soon as the school down, everything became text and email. And very few schools were doing we're calling people and saying this is what's going on. Yeah, they had the robocalls and that was helping some, but a lot of that communication went through text. And so this principal, after she had that conversation, it totally changed what she was doing, because she realized that somebody was completely not getting the messages at all. And he was totally cut off from everything else. And that's really sad and unfortunate, because it shouldn't be that way. And, if you think about what they are experiencing and what that looks like, gaining empathy for that is going to be a huge first step. And then once you do that, try to find ways that you can make things work better for them, because it is possible for it to be better, and it can be, but you won't know that unless you're actually reaching out and trying to understand what they're experiencing. So a quick example of that, and when you walk up to your school doors where parents come in, one, do they know where the front door is at your school? Is there something that says, hey, I'm the front door, you should come here? Number two, when they get to the door, do they see a main sign that says all visitors must report to the office? Or do they see a sign that say, we welcome you, that is written in every language that that families in your community speak? What does that experience look like? And if you walk up to the school and you immediately feel like you are in prison because you have to go through a checkpoint system to be able to get in, if that feels like prison, then it's going to feel like prison. If that feels like a welcoming, we care about you, we want you here, but we also want to keep our kids safe, there's a way to do that the right way. And you've got to think about those things, from the signage that you post to the activities that people go through to get into the building, and all kinds of different things. Those matter, and people pay attention and notice, and they feel welcome or they don't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a proactive step that was the only way to have uncovered the information in that case. And in other cases, unless you take the action, you never would have learned that. No, because that's not a information that would have just come to you. Right. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. So let's kind of pivot here to our last question here. And I'm going to kind of steal a question from you. At the bottom line, it's all about students, right? All these things, whether it's supporting ourselves as leaders, our faculty, parents, community, it's all about how all those things trace back and support the student experience and learning in our schools. So, on your podcast, you like to close by asking the guests, what's a transformative action that a leader can take in their schools this week? And so, let's close by talking about the student experience. And if you could only pick one thing out of many that that are the key actions that leaders are taking to create a transformative experience for students, where should a leader start?
So where should leaders start with making a transformative experience for students? You're absolutely right that it goes back to the students. So we need to really think about what their experience is like at our school. And what I would suggest you do is be a student for a day and see what that experience is like. Follow the same student around all day long, see what they experience. Don't say anything, don't participate. You just be there observing them and observing their experience. And it will make a huge difference. Now, because I've been talking about this on my podcast for so many years, many people have likely already done that. And so I want you to do it. If you've already done that, I want you to do it with a little bit different perspective. I want you to find the areas where things were not positive in any way, and see what you could do in your school to make that more positive. So it doesn't have to be to change everything and make it perfect, but little things like how kids go to the bathroom. So once I shadowed a student, I realized that asking to go to the bathroom is a horrible experience for a kid, because they have to tell everybody that they need to go do something private, and it's uncomfortable for a lot of kids. Not everybody, some kids don't care at all, but for a lot of kids, that's an uncomfortable thing. So as soon as I recognized that, I made it my policy that if you need to go to the bathroom, you just go and you grab the hall pass if the school has a hall pass, and you just take care of business, because that's how I would want to be treated. If I were in a meeting, I would want to feel comfortable that I could just get up and take care of business. And that's just a little thing, but giving kids autonomy and power over their own bodies is is so important, and that goes a long way to supporting them. So long answer short, go shadow a student, look for things that are not positive, and figure out how to make those more positive.
Yep, absolutely. And that's a great thought to close on. And I think that ties everything together. So thank you. Here we've been speaking with Jethro Jones. He's author of the new book, SchoolX, available from Catt Educational. You can find it on the John Catt website, us.johncattbookshop.com here in the United States, on Amazon. Jethro, where else can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you want to check out the first chapter of that book, go to schoolx.me, and that's the best way to get a free copy of it. And then you can order it from those other places. It's a great book, and I'd love to talk with you about how I can help you implement some of those things, because it's really powerful.
Perfect. Thank you, Jethro. And listeners, make sure to connect with Jethro on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Check out the Transformative Principal podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and get your free copy or chapter of SchoolX at schoolx.me, and then go on and get the rest of it from there. Jethro, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.